This month, the Pew Research Center named Pakistan one of the most hostile nations for religious relations. And it deemed the country a hotbed of religious conflict and cited over 1,800 casualties from sectarian violence from 2012 to mid-2013. In a country where the Sunni Muslim majority government has broad powers and rules with blasphemy laws that have the might to quash any religious dissent and silence minority Hindu, Shia and Christian groups, what can be done to create a more tolerant and peaceful Pakistan? Well, joining me now to discuss, we have HuffPost national religion reporter Javed Kaleem, who has recently been researching in Pakistan for a series of stories that are going to be published in the coming weeks on the newly launched HuffPost World Post. Mohammed Jibrin Nasir, a lawyer, political activist and Sunni Muslim in Karachi, Pakistan, who has been working to end the marginalization against religious minorities in the country. Qasim Iqbal, Executive Director of Naz Male Health Alliance, the first and community-based organization in Pakistan for gay men and transgender people, and Samir Kalra, the Director and Senior Fellow for Human Rights at the Hindu American Foundation. So I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. Javed, I want to start with you. Pakistan was recently named one of the most hostile nations for religious relations. It wasn't always this way. Can you tell me, what's happened? What's the shift been in the last few years that have gained this state for it?
One major shift that we've all experienced in the last 13 years is September 11th and the war on terrorism. And if you just look at one of the biggest minority groups in Pakistan, Christians, they're seen as Americans, as Westerners, and that's why they're often attacked, because people are mad about Muslim countries like Afghanistan and Iraq being invaded, and various military alliances and political alliances of the West over there. So that's actually one of the biggest reasons for what's happening here.
And the interesting thing is that this seems like a bit of a misnomer, because you point out in your article that's going to be published on the World Post that Pakistan's constitution guarantees freedom of religion. How is that possible given what we see and we read about the violence against religious minorities?
It does guarantee freedom of religion. It puts Islam at a superior point, but you can be any religion. And Pakistan, its flag actually has a white stripe, which represents its minorities. And it was founded as a nation for Muslims, but also for everyone else. But in practice, that's not always the case.
And you're talking about in practice that not being the case. We've just seen headlines like this one, for instance, today: blasphemy case, Britain in Pakistan sentenced to death. This is a 70-year-old British man who's been sentenced to death after being convicted on these blasphemy laws because he was writing letters claiming that he was the prophet. To tell us a little bit, very briefly, about these blasphemy laws and in the kind of context of religious curtailment of religious expression in Pakistan.
The blasphemy laws actually are to protect, I believe, all religions, especially the Abrahamic ones, but they're actually used almost exclusively to protect blasphemy against Islam. And the way the laws work, you could say the mildest thing about Islam, and somebody could accuse you of blasphemy, and you could be arrested and jailed before you're really tried. And often convicted, sentenced to death, for example, or other fines. Now, I don't believe anybody has been actually put to death because of these crimes, but just the social pressure of the laws themselves, people often get murdered by somebody else.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting thing to point out, and it's kind of terrifying one if you're living in Pakistan. This idea that kind of murder and violence for your religious beliefs, are sort of almost commonplace. It seems. We read about them every day. Jibran, I want to bring you in here. So, tell us a little bit about the work that you do in Pakistan, particularly with regards to sort of aiding the Shia cause.
Hi, Caroline. Nice. Thank you for taking me online. But to carry on the conversation which we were having with Javed first, blasphemy laws in Pakistan are indeed manufactured and maneuvered in a way that they specifically protect Muslims more than any other section of society. And perhaps Pakistan is the only country in the world where by law, and not by default, but by design of the government, the special group which is being protected against hate speech is the majority, which is the Sunni or Shia Muslims for that matter, as opposed to the minorities, For example, in Europe, Jews, being a minority, are protected under anti-Semitic laws. However, that is not the case in Pakistan. Here, the Muslims are preferred, even though they are the majority. And the work I have been doing recently is not because any state-sponsored terrorism is taking place in Pakistan. Javeed is right that the Constitution of Pakistan does guarantee freedom of religion to every religion. But the atrocities which are taking place in terms of, bomb blasts taking place at churches or at temples, that is more being done by terrorist organizations that ban outfits operating in Pakistan. For example, Tehreek-e-Taliban, for example, Lashkar-e-Jhanvi, for example, Lashkar-e-Tayyiba, Sipah Sahaba, and all those other banned outfits, which take out these attacks, and these attacks have increased after 9/11 because some way the relationship is being formed between the West, NATO, and Christianity. And an example of that could be that in September 2002, on the first death anniversary of the 9/11 attack, the first anniversary of 9/11 attack rather, around 8 to 9 churches were burned down in Pakistan by these terrorist outfits. So these terrorist outfits, through their actions, are actually trying to form a link which does not exist between NATO and NATO's operation in Afghanistan and Christianity. Christianity is a religion. NATO's operation are an armed struggle. It is a political struggle for other motives. So the point is to confuse the people. The point is to throw out hate speech there. The point is to take benefit of the ignorance which is privileged in Pakistan society, and even try to maneuver popular support against minorities, religious minorities, and towards the cause of the Taliban. But then again, this is not something I'll call is something being done at a national level, at a state-sponsored level. It is being done by these banned outfits who, through the course of time, especially through the past 2 decades in Pakistan, have crept into our society and seeped into our society through various ways.
Gibran, I'm curious to know, sort of in terms of on a grassroots level, what is being done to sort of speak out. What is being done within the Shia communities within Pakistan, who obviously are the minority. It is a Sunni country largely, but what is being done at a grassroots level to speak out? I'm looking at your Twitter here, and you have coffins of Mustang martyrs lying under open skies, asking for justice, and then we have a very graphic photograph of bodies of people who have been killed. Tell us what's been going on a grassroots level and just how violent it is if you are a Shia Muslim living in Pakistan today.
It's not a best time of living as a Shia Muslim in Pakistan, and especially as an outspoken Shia Muslim in Pakistan. And again, the responsibility of this attack was taken by Lashkar-e-Jhanvi, which at one point of time had the patronage of the government of Pakistan, when the government of Pakistan was trying to pursue its own aims, political aims against India and in Afghanistan. And now these demons, these little beasts have turned into Frankenstein and they're backfiring. And what has been done at the grassroots level is nothing but protest, because Shias at the end of the day form only 20 to 25% of the Pakistan population demographic, and they are a minority. Protests and sit-ins have taken place from time to time throughout Pakistan. At the end of the day, the solution can only come from a change in government policy, which focuses more towards addressing this issue hand-on. The education reforms have to come in Pakistan. Hate speech has to be taken out. Comparative religious studies have to be introduced. The government has to identify these banned outfits as enemy of state. The government has to launch a full frontal operation against them, because at the most, as an ordinary citizen, regardless whether you are a Shia, an Ahmadi, a Christian, a Hindu, a Parsi, a Sikh, or even a Sunni Muslim, if an atrocity is committed against you, the most you can do is protest. I mean, going to courts is ridiculous because all these banned outfits hide out in remote areas. The police can't possibly apprehend them. An army operation has to take place. So yes, the sentiment of the ordinary citizen at the moment in time, which the government is not realizing, is for an army operation, is for the army to be called out and get rid of this menace. Because again, I will say, Pakistan as a country, we as people, are very hospitable in living any regular day. What is happening right now, the discrimination which is happening against religious minority, is a result of Islamization program which was introduced through dictatorship and imposed government of General Ziaul Haq, which for 10 days followed the policy of maneuvering state-owned system and the government of taking conservative political narrative of Islam and turning it into the popular narrative of Islam.
Absolutely.
And this was done by dictatorship and imposed government. And now we are seeing the disadvantage of that policy, which has been taking place by dictatorship 30 years ago.
Yeah, and Gibran, I think that you sort of bringing into the wider political context of what's going on in Pakistan as well, I think is very valid. I just want to bring in this clip because we spoke earlier this week to one young woman and journalist who is living in Pakistan whose family has been directly targeted because they are Shia Muslim. Here's Shireen Jaffrey, and she's talking about what happened to her cousin who was shot and killed by the TTP last August as he travelled to work in Karachi. Take a listen.
He was targeted mainly because he was a Shia. So after that, he was on vent for like 2 days, after which he succumbed to his injuries and died after like just 2 days. Yeah, we weren't expecting it happening in the family so close. We have been seeing news and hearing things like these for quite a lot, but this happening in the family directly was very horrible. We couldn't sleep for days. We were in constant denial that he's gone and all. So it was a horrible experience. I still am in a bit of denial that he is not here anymore. We still have this weird feeling that he is here.
Yeah, it's a harrowing story. And Javed, I just want to know, how commonplace are these attacks? We heard from Gibran a little bit, but you were researching, you were doing a lot of reporting in Pakistan. How commonplace is that sort of attack that Shireen was outlining?
It's sadly very common, actually. I have a whole Twitter feed and news feed that I follow, and you will see news about an attack against Shias every day almost. Every week something's happening: a suicide bombing, a drive-by shooting. Sometimes a kidnapping, and I do also want to point out that we're talking about lots of doom and gloom, and of course there are people living their lives fine as well. It's often about class, and if you're an upper class person or educated person, you're okay.
Right.
But there is something happening so often, especially with Shias.
Which is, which is why your reporting and the reporting of the work that Gibran has been doing as well is so important. Samir, I want to bring you in before I get to Kasim. Samir, I know that you have been doing an awful lot of work with Hindus. It's not just Shia Muslims, it's not just Christians, as we were saying as well. Also, Hindus are being targeted in Pakistan. Can you just tell us very briefly a little bit about the work you do?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on today, Caroline. So I'm with the Hindu American Foundation, as you had mentioned, and our main goal is really to raise awareness about what's been happening to the Hindu minority in Pakistan, here in the U.S., and particularly in Washington, D.C. There's been some discussion about the alliance between the U.S. and Pakistan. From our perspective here in the U.S., there's been too much emphasis on that military relationship without due consideration given to the issues that minorities are facing, and particularly religious freedom and human rights issues. So our main focus has really been to raise awareness of that and really impact the U.S.'s foreign policy goals in the region, the relationship with Pakistan, and to shift it away from that primarily military relationship and turn it into one where human rights and religious freedom comes to the centerpiece. And it's obviously a mutually beneficial relationship.
And Samir, sorry, carry on. Finish your sentence
sure.
Before I cut you off.
No, so I was saying that this is kind of our main goal. And when we go to a number of congressional offices, they keep saying, yes, we know the problem is bad, but there's always a but. We rely on Pakistan. If we don't rely on the military there will be absolute chaos. So there's this kind of what I would say a false belief that their only hope is in the military. And I think has been mentioned, I think there's a great deal of hope if there's an open democracy there and these secularism and human rights are really emphasized in that relationship.
And you're talking about human rights. I just want to show everybody a clip from a documentary that you worked on to raise awareness of the issues facing Pakistani Hindu refugees.
Over 100,000 of them are scattered throughout India. Almost 1,000 cross the border into India's state of Rajasthan each year. They are mothers and fathers, grandparents, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles. They are stateless. These are the faces of the refugees who have fled Pakistan, their country of birth. They are no longer welcome there because they are Hindu. They fled from daily persecution, social prejudice, and economic exploitation. They fled to save their daughters from being kidnapped, forcibly converted to Islam, and married off to unknown Muslim men. They fled so they could openly and freely practice their religion. This large-scale migration of Hindus from Pakistan is only likely to increase as conditions for minorities continue to deteriorate there. Beyond a humanitarian disaster, it may have far-reaching consequences for stability in the subcontinent. How long will their plight be tolerated?
Well, a link to the full documentary, by the way, guys, is in our resource well below for those interested in watching it in full. Samir, very quickly, just tell us a little bit more about the film and what you hope that the international community is going to take away from it.
Sure. So the first thing I think at a very basic level is just acknowledging that there is a large-scale migration of Hindus from Pakistan into the bordering states in India primarily. And they're pretty much living in no man's land, in essence, because they're not Pakistani citizens anymore. They've pretty much given that up. And in India, they're not given full legal status as well. They're not recognized as refugees either by the Indian government or internationally. So according to them, refugee status, which they do meet the criteria for under international law, I think will help them obtain benefits and protections that most refugees do around the world. So the film is kind of as a way to raise awareness about not only the situation facing the refugees, but what are the core issues within Pakistan that's forcing these Hindus and at some point other minorities potentially to be leaving Pakistan, and how do we address it at both levels?
Absolutely. And, the headlines that we've seen as well very recently are kind of evidence of what you're saying. I mean, this is one from the Daily Mail recently: Hindus and Sikhs suffering from a lack of cremation grounds in Pakistan. Obviously, being forced out in many different ways. But, we've been speaking a little bit about kind of religious minorities in a broad sense. Kasim, I want to bring you in here because it isn't just religious minorities that are persecuted or, intolerated in Pakistan. There are other minorities as well, including the LGBT community. Can you hear me, Kasim? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now I can. Sorry.
That's great. Yeah, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about the work that you do and the plight facing LGBT minorities in Pakistan.
Well, what we do is I'm actually heading the one of Pakistan's. Hello?
We can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. Carry
Hello?
on, Kasim. We can hear you, Kasim. I don't know if you can hear us. Can you hear us?
You're breaking up. I don't think this is a good connection. Can you?
Kasim, I think we'll try and get you on the phone, but Javed, just, sort of very briefly, I know you did some work on this whilst you're in Pakistan. Can you just tell us briefly, what is the situation for LGBT people in Pakistan today?
Sure. I was able to meet Qasim, and there's two stories to LGBT people, like many other groups in Pakistan. On one hand, of course, homosexuality is legalized, and that's an issue there for many people. But it's also a cultural issue where there are many gay people in Pakistan. There's many transgender people. The word used is Khwaja Sara, which is the traditional term used there. But they're often in the closet. There's many men married to women who, have sex with men on the side, who don't identify as gay. And thus there's also a big AIDS problem as well, that the government actually is working on with groups like Qasim's. At the same time, you will also find upper class and educated gay people who a minority who's actually out and living that way amongst their friends at least, and networking via websites, via Facebook, via phone applications. Still very underground. There's no such thing as a gay club or a gay
so
rights group or anything.
It's not kind of like public then. But it's fascinating that social media is taking sort of like a sort of center stage, I guess, in people being able to connect with one another in Pakistan on this issue.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's growing. I think Pakistanis more than any other group love Facebook. So when I was traveling there and researching there, I found everybody through Facebook. So
well, that's good. It's good to know, especially I guess for a reporter as well. Kasim, I don't know if you're still there and you could hear what Javed was saying. I don't think we're able to get Kasim actually. Well, listen, we will try and
can I contribute? Can I contribute on the issue of lesbians and gays in Pakistan?
Sorry, Gibran. Yeah, what you were saying something?
Yes. Talking about the LGBT community in Pakistan, as Javed rightly mentioned, there are quite a few transgenders in Pakistan, and as far as lesbians and gays are concerned, they move around very discreetly because there is no specific law. Under Islamic law, same gender sex is banned. However, the little improvement which has taken place recently in Pakistan, which was actually baffling for most of us, but baffling is not really a positive word to use, but rather a positive development, was that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, for the first time, and this was only as old as 5 years ago, ordered the government to issue national identity cards to transgenders and actually write their gender as a transgender, as opposed to define them as male or female. And so hence, transgenders for the first time in Pakistan got voting rights as transgenders, as opposed to having to declare themselves as men. And that was a very positive development. And following that, in the past 2 years, two superior court decisions of Pakistan have come out where two men who are identified having gender identity disorder, and they were by law and by court order allowed to go and have a sex change operation and officially become women, or legally rather become women from men. So this kind of positive development has taken place in Pakistan, but of course, as LGBT rights are concerned, we have a long, long way to go. We're not even at the moment struggling with simple, common, basic human rights as far as religion is concerned. And Pakistan is a conservative society, but hopefully we are aiming and working towards a tolerant Pakistan.
Well, Gibran, I think that it's a great thing to be able to end on a positive note. And also, guys, in the resource well, this is one article: Pakistani Muslims form a human chain to protect Christians during a mass. And this is something that Gibran was actually involved in. You can read more about this moment in the resource well. The article will be there. But everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. And, Javed, thank you so much for all the work you're doing as well. And guys, to learn more about the situation in Pakistan at the moment, you can check out the links in our resource well. And also the World Post for more of Javed's excellent reporting. Stick around, there is much more HuffPost Live coming up next.